Greetings and welcome to Greybeard Report episode number 4. As you can see, I am without my normal partner today due to social distancings and dealing with our new life of the beer bug, otherwise known as coronavirus. Things are a little bit different for today. What I'd like to do is to go over highlights of the transcript of the court case against Dan Samaria from the 30th of January. For the purpose of definitions, the court will represent the judge, village attorney will be Rebecca Rodriguez or Ms. Rodriguez, the witness is Dan Samaria, and Dan's counsel was Drew Dilworth. Let's get started. Comments from the judge. If your client lives at the same home right now, because my understanding is the latest affidavit I saw from him, dated 1/27/2020, indicates that he lives there. How is this action not premature? If he still lives there, I understand how foreclosures work, believe me. I've handled them for many years sitting here, and I've seen things that can happen to turn them around at the last minute. Maybe someone comes in, family member helps them repurchase a home from a third party, from the bank, anything's possible, right? But the whole point is that the person is still living there. How has there been any violation of any residency requirement? The court further states, this may be a silly question, but if Mr. Samaria at some point moves from the home that he's in the middle of this foreclosure crisis, and moves into, say, an efficiency, Mr. Dilworth, yes sir, court, does that in any way violate his residency requirement? Mr. Dilworth, not at all. The court, what if he moves into an RV that's inside a Biscayne park? Mr. Dilworth, not at all. In fact, if you were to look at the law on becoming an eligible voter, which is effectively the standard here, and if he were basically homeless, there is a federal registry where you can draw on a map where you are, where you are most of the time, file that, and you can have a voter status. Now, it's not going to go that far, obviously, and of course, none of these facts are ripe yet, which is where you started. But I guess I was focusing on what was a rush here. It just feels so petty and vindictive for someone who was clearly in a difficult spot financially to then want to just foreclose him out of standing in the community, where they have a village meeting scheduled several days later where all of this could have been raised. Now, this upcoming January meeting timetable is vital to understand the possible motives behind this. Why was this so rushed just before a meeting? Why spend over $10,000 before bringing this in front of the commission, which was a charter violation? The same meeting where 2 new commissioners were to be sworn in and possible personnel changes to be made. I want you to think about that. This speaks to motive, possible motive. The court. I was looking at the plaintiff's petition, petitioner's petition, I guess, and on the petition they indicate, it says Biscayne Park's charter echoes the state laws. Mr. Dilworth, yes sir, that's right. The court. That was the beginning of this case, where there were no issue about any conflict between the charter or Mr. Dilworth, right, because that wasn't addressed at all. And so she is relying on, the village attorney, I apologize, is relying upon Florida 114 and harmonizing it with 205B1, right? And talking about the forfeiture of office. But you can't find anything, at least I didn't, in 114, and this is the applicable test, as the legislature intended to do, to exclude anything from municipalities and their ability to invoke home rule. They didn't. So I agree that 114 is harmonious with 205B1, and I think 205B3, which is part of what was omitted when the original order was entered, not discussed at all in the petition, is consistent with the balance of 114, which reserves in the executive a determination, first determination of removal someone from office. I'm sorry about the legalese, I'm going to try to keep that to a minimal. But see how this is now morphed from a residency challenge into a method of removing someone from their office. So the idea mentioned that this would have all just gone away if Dan had just given them his address, which they already knew, doesn't seem to hold water now, does it? Hope you're seeing this. The court. Going back to your point on a heavy hand was used, one of the, I think, statements in the petition was that they had sent Mr. Samaria a request for certain information. And if I call that correctly, I mean, I'd have to look it up again. But there was nothing returned. Mr. Dilworth, yes, the court. So basically saying, look, sir, tell us where you live. Mr. Dilworth, yes, the court. And if the person had simply just returned something, an affidavit, something indicating where they lived, they wouldn't have sought this relief now that they sought. Now, did that in fact go down that way where he gave nothing? Or as he said, I still live here, and they decided nonetheless to proceed? Mr. Dilworth, slightly different. As local politics often are, Your Honor, they're very contentious, unfortunately. I'm not, but I don't want to raise that. Here's what happened. They knew where he lived, the village manager. Why did he know that? The declaration says, and it's unrebutted, the day after filing the petition, the court, I read your stuff, Mr. Dilworth, okay. The court, they went to his house and they delivered some work. So my client felt the original letter, which is heavy-handed, where there is a commission meeting on the 14th of January, and in reading the charter that says the commission itself, not the village subordinate officers, are the ones that ask the question. This has never been raised before the commission. Everyone knew that there was a foreclosure. The village manager knew how to get in touch with Mr. Samaria. In his mind, he's not answerable to the village attorney. He's answerable to the commission and was fully prepared to go. He actually went on the 14th, which was a January meeting date, and no commission meeting happened. So it's an acknowledgement that yes, he didn't respond, but he didn't think he had to. He didn't think that it was the providence of the village attorney or the village manager, particularly since he knew that they knew where he lived. And so that's part of the reason why I'd like to take Mr. Manner's deposition. I'd like, how do you say that this is so important, yet the day after bringing it to court 4 or 5 days before the commission meeting, when you could have raised it, you served the village papers at his home, so you knew where he lived. That's an unanswerable question today, and that's the rationale of why he didn't answer this letter. He didn't think he had to. And of course he has now, but they haven't dismissed it. So, the court excerpts. Okay, let me hear from the other side. Before you give me your, I guess, counterposition or positions, I'm wrestling with the issue of, if this gentleman still lives at his house, whether it be that he could be gone tomorrow or he could be gone in a month, what are we doing here? Ms. Rodriguez, well, the court, isn't there a better way to have handled this other than to make me stop the world to address this issue? Because that's what I've done. There are other matters I could have set, and I've had to push those aside in order to call you guys in. Ms. Rodriguez, well, Judge, there are two counts of relief being sought by the village in this case. And first off, we're here on a motion to dismiss, and a lot of what's been raised by counsel is outside the four corners of our petition, far outside the four corners of our petition, and the standard review for a motion to dismiss is to review the facts review the allegations in the most favorable to the non-movement, which is us, and we've set forth the minimum pleading requirements for your honor to issue a writ for quo warranto, not an attorney, it's best I can come up with, to the response. Okay, so the manager instructed me, and this is in the petition. This is what allegedly the petition said, to contact the commissioner and get some proof that he still resides where he says, where he originally only qualified for, and if he moved, tell us where he had moved. But again, he had not moved yet, and Christian and Rebecca both knew this. In addition, because I did happen to see the demand letter from Rebecca Rodriguez, it was for documentation showing a new address, a new voter's registration card, but he hadn't moved yet, so he was physically unable to produce any of what was demanded in the letter. Now, tell me what you would have done under that circumstance. Okay. All right, now we're going to get into a Q&A with the village attorney and Dan. This is after he was on the stand. But before that, I want you to think why this was so pushed through before a meeting that was rumored to select another mayor, replace the attorney's firm, and discuss the manager's position. So who was in a position of gain or loss here? And do you find that a coincidence as to the timing? Okay. Question, actually, excuse me, this is from the village attorney and Dan, question and answers. Question from the attorney. So the appellate court unanimously denied your emergency motion to stop the enforcement. Dan, right. Of the writ? Right. They gave me 10 days to file a new motion, and we did, and we filed the motion. Question, right. The appellate court issued an order to show cause as to why your appeal should not be dismissed as untimely. Answer, which we did, and it was granted. Question, while your extension to respond to the same order to show cause, answer, no, was granted. Answer, no. It was extended. I have until the 23rd. Question, so you no longer have a rental agreement at 1010 property address. As of right now, because she was, as of right now, because she was scared off by the person, the village attorney's processor, yes, and she was. You people can sit here and deny it or not, this lady was scared off. This is a second resident that I had that I was going to help me out and got scared off because they didn't want to get involved. Question, have you ever asked a resident to lie for you? Answer, no. And to say that they lived with you? Answer, no. Question, I'm sorry, let me go back. Did you ever ask Rosemary Watts to lie for you? My apologies. Answer is no. And to say that you lived with her? Nope. And Ms. Rosemary is right here if you want to ask her. Question, so what's your plan if the bank executes the writ? Answer, well, let me. Question, today what's? Answer, okay, my plan is to find, and I have 3 more, 2.5 years left on my term. I plan on running for re-election and I plan on winning. So my goal is to stay in Biscayne Park for as long. I love the village and I'm going to stay as long as I can. I'll probably die in the village unless something seriously happens that I, have to leave the village. My intention is to be in the village. So to me, his residency intention is quite clear, and the attorney accused Dan of asking someone to lie for him. You just can't make this up. Dan, so I still got, and I'm not about to, like 2 other commissioners, abandon the voters. The voters voted me in as their commissioner, and my plan is to finish my term, and then also to run for re-election. Village attorney. So, the city manager knew that. Question. So if the sheriff executes the writ today, answer, then I'll find another place to live. Question. But as we sit here today, you don't have an alternative arrangement lined up. Answer. I had it until you people chased her off. Yes, because I'll be honest with you. If I received the notices she got, I would say I didn't want to be involved in this. I'd like to help you, Commissioner Samaria, but I don't want to be involved in this. And that was it. The lady was scared off. Question. Do you recall getting an email from me asking where you've moved to, or if you've moved out of the property yet? Answer is yes. And I said to you that I did not say to you, but you're not entitled to that. The commission is the only one that's entitled, according to our charter, to ask, especially when a city manager knows that I live at that address. Further from Dan. So I mean, if I go, and let me ask Your Honor a question, let's say I get in my house and I go into the hospital. I'm living at my house, but I'm in the hospital for 3 weeks. Does that mean that I no longer live at my house? The court, that's a good question. The witness, okay, and it's my intention is to be, unless I decide today to resign from the commission, my intention is to fulfill my job as a commissioner. Yes, it could happen that I'm out of the house, I can stay living with someone according to, and my attorney can clarify it. I think Miami Shore law stated that as long as my intent is to stay there, I can be living at someone else's house for a couple of weeks until I find another place. I don't have to find another place tomorrow unless, Your Honor, unless I'm wrong about that, Your Honor. The court. Well, that presents an issue that is not necessarily before me right now. Now, my question when I was at court, along with 13 other residents to witness this, was why was the issue not before the judge as part of the lawsuit? Meaning, what constitutes residency? I couldn't understand that, and I would still like to know, since this was brought up as a residency challenge. In my opinion, residency should have been defined and expanded on as you don't lose your residency status at the moment of a foreclosure or temporary relocation. And as such, you don't lose your seat on a commission either. But this was the village attorney's tactic from the village attorney. That being said, now that we have the commissioner's sworn testimony, which is really all we ever wanted, I would request that Your Honor defer so I can confer with the village manager about the testimony here today, because potentially, now that he's sworn to this information, we may not need declaratory relief. The manager might accept his sworn testimony and might authorize me to dismiss, I don't know. The court. But then let me ask you a question. The declaratory relief would be what? On this moment, let's say today was the day that I had to make that declaration that you seek. What would you be seeking, Ms. Rodriguez? A declaration as to whether he is still eligible to hold office in Biscayne Park based on his representations about his residency status. Bingo. Now we have the motive of all of this. From the final verdict excerpts from the court. Well, this is the thing. He had what appeared to be a pretty good plan until his neighbor backed out. I'm not going to comment on why she backed out. It could be, he says, or they theorized, that she was pressured. It may be that she just felt pressured by virtue of a subpoena that she was served with. And at that point, I really don't want to get involved with lawyers and questions and depositions. That scares me. When someone may have backed out. So it really doesn't matter at this point, again, if this was a case that I talked about before me, and sometimes I just talk because I like to see, what I'd like to see here is some form of resolution. I see this gentleman here, I'm not sure how old you are, Mr. Samaria, Dan, 65, the court. 65 years old, he served the community. I think he recognizes that he has an obligation to reside within that jurisdiction as any other commissioner of any municipality has to recognize. He had, in fact, a Plan B in place that kind of fell apart yesterday. It appears that he's going to be working on Plan B. I haven't based my ruling on the fact that he's working on another Plan B or that it is his subjective intent. I based it solely on what's in front of me right now. Is this the man that slept last night at his house? He used the keys, right? Dan Samaria, yes, sir. The court, all right. So the case is not ripe. It's not ripe. It just isn't. So I'll hand copies of the order to my clerk. He'll make the copies, give them to you guys. It was a pleasure. I truly hope not to see you guys again. Now, please don't take that personally, because I say that because I mean that you guys would have somehow worked this out. Ms. Rodriguez, are you abandoning your request for post-judgment discovery, or the court, I dismiss the case? So there will not be any discovery. This hearing, again, was on 1/30 of this year. On 1/29 of this year, the law firm severed their contract with the village, looked to reassign Rebecca Rodriguez off of finishing up our case and reassigned another more senior attorney for the wrap-up of up to 30 days. However, back on February the 4th, which is the same day of our February meeting, since the January meeting was stalled, Rebecca is back at court, and this is from the legal bills entry, to prepare draft motion for a rehearing and for sanctions for committing fraud upon the court and failing to disclose material fact to tribunal sheriff's execution of writ of possession occurred prior to the 1:30 hearing. And for that, she billed us $517.50. Now, first off, that's wrong. The execution was on 1/31, not prior to 1:30, and actually Dan had access for another day, or part of another day, to remove items from the home. So in essence, the date was either 1/31 or 2/1, not prior to 1:30. And again, this was done after getting his address, which is all they sought, according to her earlier in this testimony. I want to give you a general timeline that speaks to me to motivation. Late last year, 2 of Tracy's hand-picked commissioners quit, 30 days apart. This created a special election, cost to the village of about $16,016.5. Earlier this year in January, 2 new commissioners were elected. I think it's safe to say they were non-Tracy supporters. But now she's lost the majority of the commission, and rumored changes are to come. In January's meeting, Tracy stalled government by not showing up for the meeting. That was covered by the press a couple of times. So there was no installation of new commissioners or any village business conducted. 3 days later, the 2 commissioners were sworn in and ready to go for February. Oof. So we were told on a Tuesday that they could not be sworn in until the next village meeting, but 3 days later realized that was an error, and the 2 commissioners were sworn in and ready to go. So now we're coming up to the February the 4th meeting, again, February 4th, the morning of, Rebecca's back in court, as I just mentioned, to refile Dan's case after the judge said he didn't want to see us again, and to try to resolve it for ourselves. Later on the afternoon of the 4th, 2 hours before the meeting, knowing that this did not go through, meaning the case was dismissed and could not refile quick enough to stall the meeting, Tracy quits. But reserves the right to sue the village, and created another special election that's 2 and 3 months. Now, Tracy could have served the remainder of her term in office, but not as mayor, but she chose to quit instead. We were lucky to avoid the cost of another special election, as Ross ran unopposed. After that, we fired the manager with cause, and Chuck and I will be back with a fact check of his appeal and other information for that, so that'll be coming soon. And we brought back an interim village manager to serve during this transition. After that, Dan's lawyer files a letter of intent to sue the responsible parties. So that is where we are now. I know there's been a lot of discussion on social media as to the intent of the lawsuit, who's involved. I cannot speak for Dan. I am not here to defend Dan. I'm here simply to look for transparency and relay the truth for you, since the village has not chosen this path. However, what I have gotten from Dan, as word of mouth, is that he has no intention of suing the taxpayers, but the village had to be named in the lawsuit due to employees or contractors of the village that are involved and will be named when the lawsuit has been filed, which is, as of today, Monday, not yet. So this is where we are. Again, for anyone interested in getting the full transcript, please contact me via email or private message on Nextdoor. I'll send you a copy. I've done it to almost a half a dozen residents so far, gotten their feedback, and I think that's really what we're trying to do, is just make sure that we all understand what happened and the reasons why. Until then, I'll wish you a nice afternoon, stay safe, wash your hands, and we'll be back soon.